Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house always felt like a performance. But that night, the stage was set for something I never saw coming. The table was perfect. Crystal glasses, expensive food, practice smiles. Everyone was laughing a little too loudly, especially when my billionaire grandfather walked in with his lawyer by his side. The room shifted instantly. Shoulders straightened. Voices softened. Eyes followed his every move. I hadn't been home in years. I only came because he asked me to. Halfway through dinner, he put down his fork and looked directly at me. "Evelyn," he said calmly, "I hope the money has been helping you." Before I could even respond, he added, "I've been sending you $15,000 a month for rent." The laughter died. Forks froze in midair. I felt every eye turn toward me. My heart started pounding as I asked the only honest question I could think of. "What are you talking about?" And in that silence, I realized my entire family had been hiding something from me. The moment my grandfather arrived, the entire house changed its posture. My father, Mark, straightened his back like he was about to be inspected. My mother, Susan, rushed to take his coat, smiling so wide her cheeks trembled. Even my younger sister, Brooke, who usually couldn't be bothered to look up from her phone, suddenly sat upright, smoothing her hair as if she'd been waiting for this moment all night. And me, I stayed where I was at the far corner of the table. I hadn't sat at this table in years. Yet, everything looked strangely familiar. The same oversized dining room, the same heavy wooden chairs, the same unspoken rule that we were supposed to look like a good family, no matter how fragile the truth underneath might be. Dinner began. Like a carefully rehearsed play. My mother kept serving food that no one had asked for. My father laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Brooke scrolled through her phone under the table, occasionally glancing up just long enough to flash a polite smile. My grandfather, Harold Whitmore, watched quietly. He always did. He didn't talk much at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried weight, the kind that made people measure every word before they spoke. I noticed how my parents kept checking his reaction, as if approval was something they could earn with the right tone of voice. I tried to stay invisible. I nodded when spoken to. I smiled when expected. I kept my hands folded in my lap so no one would notice they were shaking. When Grandpa Harold finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "So, Evelyn," he said, looking at me over his glass. "How have you been living lately?" My mother jumped in before I could answer. "She's been busy," Susan said brightly. "You know, Evelyn always independent." My father nodded. "She insists on doing everything herself." I forced a small smile. Independent. That was their favorite word for me. It sounded positive, responsible, admirable. What it really meant was on your own. "I'm managing," I said. Carefully. Grandpa Harold studied my face for a long second, as if weighing something he hadn't yet decided to say. "You look tired," he said. The room went still. Susan laughed quickly. "Oh, she's always been like that. Overworks herself." Brooke finally looked up from her phone. "She does love playing the martyr." I ignored her. Grandpa Harold's gaze never left me. "Are you taking care of yourself?" That question almost broke me. Not because it was dramatic, but because no one else had asked it in years. "Yes," I lied softly. My grandfather nodded, but I wasn't sure he believed me. The food arrived expensive, beautifully plated, untouched for long stretches of time. Conversation floated around safe topics: business, renovations, travel plans. My parents talked about the house like it was a trophy they'd earned, not a place built on carefully maintained appearances. At one point, my father leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "We've been doing pretty well," he said casually. "Things finally stabilized." My grandfather hummed in response. "That's good," he said. Stability matters, he paused. Then added almost as an afterthought, especially when someone is starting out on their own. His eyes shifted back to me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Evelyn, he continued. Living alone isn't easy, but with the right support, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. My mother's hand tightened around her fork. My father cleared his throat. I opened my mouth to respond, but that was when my grandfather said the sentence that didn't belong. As long as rent isn't a concern, he said calmly, life becomes a little more manageable. The words landed strangely, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. I frowned slightly. Then he said it. I've been sending you $15,000 a month so you wouldn't have to worry. However, it's not Mitty Woolkid. The table went silent. No one moved. No one breathed. And in that frozen moment, I realized something was very wrong. Not with what he said, but with how quickly my parents reacted. My father laughed. Too fast. Too loud. Dad, he said, waving his hand. You know Evelyn, she doesn't keep track of money. My mother nodded immediately. We help her manage things. I stared at them. They didn't look surprised. They looked prepared. And suddenly, a cold realization crept up my spine. This conversation wasn't new to them. It was only new to me. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood everyone. Not my grandfather, but my parents. Because the way they reacted wasn't shock. It wasn't confusion. It was coordination. My father laughed again, softer this time, like he was trying to smooth over a wrinkle on an expensive tablecloth. Dad, you're exaggerating, Mark said. You know, Evelyn, she doesn't really keep track of these things. I turned to him. Slowly. Keep track of what? Susan reached for her wine glass, her fingers trembling just enough to notice if you were looking for it. Honey, she said gently. You don't remember every detail. You've had a lot on your plate. That familiar chill slid down my spine. That sentence had been used on me before. I remember my rent, I said. I pay it every month. Brooke sighed dramatically, finally putting her phone down. Oh my God, are we really doing this right now? I looked at her. Doing what? Turning dinner into one of your episodes. She replied flatly. My chest he tightened. This isn't an episode. Grandpa just said. Brooke cut me off. Grandpa says a lot of things. The room tilted slightly like the ground had shifted under my feet. My grandfather's eyes narrowed. But my mother rushed in before he could speak. Evelyn, Susan said, voice trembling in that careful theatrical way. We're just worried about you. You've always struggled with stress. Sometimes your memories get mixed up. I stared at her. Are you saying I imagined paying my rent? No, she said quickly. Of course not. We just helped. Mark nodded. Exactly. We took care of it for you. I laughed once, sharp and involuntary. You took care of my rent. Yes, he said. Firmly. Because you weren't in a position to manage money responsibly. I felt my heartbeat thudding in my ears. That's not true. Susan placed a hand over her heart. Evelyn, please don't raise your voice. I'm not raising my voice, I said. I'm asking a question. Brooke leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You always do this. You act like everyone's against you. I looked from my sister to my parents, then back to my grandfather. His expression had changed. The warmth from earlier was gone, replaced by something sharper focused. Let her speak, he said quietly. Mark's jaw tightened. Dad, she's confused. My grandfather's gaze snapped to him. Are you diagnosing her now? Silence fell again. I took a breath, forcing my hands to stay still. Grandpa, I said carefully. I don't know what money they're talking about. I've never seen it. I've never touched it. Susan shook her head slowly, tears forming in her eyes. This is exactly what I mean. She truly believes that now become did it on Bavarians. Something inside me cracked. Believe what? I asked. That I've been surviving on my own. Mark stood abruptly, palms pressed against the table. Enough. This conversation is inappropriate. Inappropriate for who? My grandfather asked. For the family, Mark snapped. I looked at him. Since when was the truth inappropriate? Brooke scoffed. You always need drama to feel important. That hurt more than I expected. I opened my mouth to respond, but my grandfather spoke first. Brooke, he said calmly. How long have you known about this? Her face stiffened. Known about what? The money, he replied. The monthly transfers. She hesitated. Just for a second. It was enough. My stomach dropped. Mark shot her a warning look. Brooke, stop. She looked away. I don't see why this matters. Mom and Dad handled it. That's all. I stared at her. You knew. I whispered. She rolled her eyes. So what? You would have wasted it anyway. The words hit me like a slap, not violent, but deeply damaging. My grandfather's voice went cold. Daniel, he said. The man who had been sitting quietly beside him finally moved. He adjusted his suit jacket and opened his briefcase. My parents' faces changed instantly. Not confusion, not indignation, fear. And that was when I understood something with terrifying clarity. They hadn't been worried about hurting me. They'd been worried about getting caught for a long moment. No one spoke. Daniel's briefcase sat open on the table like a quiet threat, but I didn't look at it yet. I couldn't. My chest felt tight, as if every breath had to fight its way out. I looked at my parents instead, at their carefully arranged faces. You keep saying I'm confused, I said slowly. So, let me be very clear about what I remember. Susan shook her head. Evelyn, please. You're upsetting yourself. No, I replied. You're upsetting me. Mark opened his mouth, but I spoke before he could cut me off. I remember the night you told me to leave. Susan's breath caught. That never happened. Yes, it did. I said. You said. I was too much. You said I was draining the family. And you told me I'd figure things out on my own. That's a lie. Mark snapped. I met his eyes. Then explain why I didn't have a place to go. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing inward. I didn't leave for freedom, I continued. I left because I was pushed. Brooke scoffed. You're twisting things. I turned to her. You were standing right there. She looked away. I remember calling Claire, I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. I remember sitting on her couch wearing the same clothes for 2 days because I didn't bring anything else. Susan covered her mouth. This is unbelievable. It was my life, I said. Not a story. I took a breath and kept going because once I started, I couldn't stop. I remember calculating how many hours I could sleep if I worked a night shift after my day job. I remember standing at a bus stop at 5 o'clock in the morning, wondering if I could afford coffee or if I needed that money for medication. Brooke rolled her eyes. You always exaggerate. I laughed softly. You posted pictures from Hawaii that same month. Her face flushed. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this, I said. Because while I was choosing between groceries and rent, you were taking selfies on the beach. Mark slammed his hand on the table. Enough. My grandfather didn't flinch. I turned back to him, my voice quieter now, more honest. I never once thought you were helping me, I said. Because if you were, I wouldn't have been that scared all the time. Susan's voice trembled. We worried about you. No, I said. You worried about appearances. Silence spread through the room like spilled ink. I gestured gently around us. This house looks different. New kitchen, new furniture, new car outside. Mark's jaw tightened. When I asked for help, I said, you told me you didn't have money, Susan whispered. We were under pressure. So was I. I replied. My hands were shaking now, and I stopped trying to hide it. I paid my rent every month, I said. Late. Sometimes, barely sometimes, but I paid it because I had to. I looked at my sister one last time. You knew, I said. And you let them convince me I was imagining things. Brooke's voice rose, defensive. You were unstable. My grandfather stood up slowly. The chair scraping against the floor was louder than any shout. That's enough, he said. Everyone froze. He looked at me not with pity, not with doubt, but with something that felt like respect. Thank you for telling me the truth, he said. Then he turned to Daniel. Now, my grandfather said calmly. Show them what I've been asking about. Daniel reached into his briefcase. And in that moment, I understood that my memories, every painful, lonely detail, were no longer standing alone. They were about to be backed by proof. Daniel moved with quiet precision. No anger, no drama. Just paper, neatly organized. He placed the folder on the table and opened it as if this were a business meeting. Not the moment my family's carefully built illusion began to crack. These are bank transfer records, he said calmly. They were sent directly from Mr. Whitmore's personal account. My father leaned back in his chair, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to himself. This is ridiculous, Mark said. Anyone can print documents. Daniel didn't react. He slid the first page forward. Transfer date, he read. The 3rd of every month. Amount, $15,000. My mother's lips parted slightly. Her eyes fixed on the paper, unblinking. Daniel continued, voice steady. Recipient, Susan Carter. The room went deathly quiet. Susan shook her head. Slowly. That doesn't mean anything. Harold was helping the family. Daniel turned the page. In the memo section, he said, it clearly states, Evelyn housing support. My stomach dropped. I felt like the floor beneath my chair had disappeared, leaving me suspended between relief and grief. Relief because I wasn't imagining things. Grief because the proof made everything real. Mark stood up again. Dad, you never said. This was strictly for her. My grandfather looked at him with a calm that felt almost cruel. I never said it. Wasn't. Mark's face flushed. You can't just decide that now. I decided it. 5 years ago, my grandfather replied. You just chose to ignore it. Daniel laid out more pages, lining them up like pieces of a puzzle no one could deny anymore. 60 consecutive transfers, he said. No interruptions. No missed months. Brooke's breathing became shallow. Susan whispered. This is a misunderstanding. Daniel looked up for the first time. His gaze direct but not unkind. A misunderstanding happens once, he said. This happened 60 times. The word 60 echoed in my head. 5 years. 5 years of wondering if I was weak. 5 years of being told I was irresponsible. 5 years of believing survival was something I had to earn. My grandfather leaned forward slightly. Evelyn never received this money, he said. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded. There is no record of any transfer to her account. Susan let out a shaky breath that sounded like a quiet collapse. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. Okay, fine. We managed it. That doesn't mean we stole it. I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. Then why was I still struggling? Mark stopped pacing. Susan looked at me, tears spilling now, but there was no comfort in her eyes, only panic. Daniel turned another page. A few days after each deposit, he said there were withdrawals, large ones. He paused deliberately. Vehicle payments, credit card balances, travel expenses. Brooke swallowed hard. Daniel closed the folder gently. There is no indication, he said, that any portion of this money was used for Evelyn's rent. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. My Grandfather straightened. So, he said quietly, I will ask one last time. He looked at my parents. Where did my money go? No one answered. And in that unbearable stillness, I knew this wasn't just a family argument anymore. It was a reckoning. The silence didn't break on its own. My grandfather broke it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam the table. He simply looked around the room at my father's rigid posture, my mother's trembling hands, my sister's pale face, and said slowly, so there would be no misunderstanding. What the hell? Every head snapped toward him. I've been sending you, he continued. Each word measured $15,000 every single month. My chest tightened. I felt the sentence land in my body like a weight I'd been carrying without knowing it had a name. For rent, he added. For Evelyn. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That number is ridiculous, Mark said hoarsely. You're making it sound. I am not making anything sound like anything, my grandfather interrupted. I am stating a fact. He turned to Daniel. Read it. Daniel didn't hesitate. From the 3rd of each month, he said, over a period of 5 years, $15,000 per transfer. He paused, then added the line that seemed to drain the color from the room. Total transferred amount. $900,000. My mother gasped. Not a polite gasp, not a performance, a real one. Brooke's hand flew to her mouth. Her face turned a vivid, unmistakable red. Not anger, not defiance, panic. I felt dizzy. $900,000. I thought of the nights I'd sat on the edge of my bed refreshing my bank app. The times I'd skipped meals. The weeks I'd worked back-to-back shifts because my account hovered just above zero. My grandfather looked at me. Evelyn, he said quietly. When you asked me what I was talking about, this is what I meant at myself too and Frey. My voice came out. Thin. I never saw it. I know, he said immediately. That's why we're here. My father stepped forward, palms raised. Dad, let's slow down. You're jumping to conclusions. Daniel spoke before my grandfather could respond. These are not conclusions, he said. They are records. Susan finally broke. She sank back into her chair, shoulders shaking. We didn't mean for it to go this far. My grandfather's eyes hardened. You meant for it to go far enough that Evelyn would never question it. Susan looked up at him, tears streaking her face. We needed it for what? He asked. For the family, she whispered. I laughed once. Soft. Bitter. You mean for yourselves. Mark snapped his head toward me. Watch your tone. My grandfather turned to him. You do not get to correct her. The room froze again. Daniel slid another document forward. There's more, he said. My father stiffened. What else could there possibly be? Patterns, Daniel replied. Consistent spending following each deposit. Car payments, renovations, travel. Catman. Brooke shook her head frantically. That doesn't prove anything. Daniel met her gaze. It proves where the money went. She swallowed hard and looked down. My grandfather stood up slowly. I asked you to help your daughter, he said. I trusted you. Instead, you took from her and told her she was confused when she struggled. Susan sobbed openly. Now please. Harold, this doesn't have to be public. My grandfather's voice was calm, devastatingly so. It already is. Mark's voice cracked. You're going to ruin us. You ruined yourselves, my grandfather said. And you did it by harming someone you were supposed to protect. He turned to Daniel. Proceed. Daniel nodded once. Yes, sir. Susan shot to her feet. No, wait, please. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stated reality. We will be filing a formal complaint for misappropriation of funds. He said, potential fraud will be evaluated based on representations made. The word fraud hung in the air. My father's knees buckled slightly as he sat back down. Brooke whispered, "You're really doing this?" I answered her. Before anyone else could. "Yes," I said. "Because you knew, and you watched me struggle anyway." She looked at me like she wanted to argue, then realized she couldn't. My grandfather placed a hand over mine. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you are not responsible for what happens next." I nodded, tears finally slipping free. "I just want the truth to stop being buried." He squeezed my hand gently. "It ends tonight." As Daniel gathered the documents, I looked at my parents one last time. They weren't angry anymore. They were exposed. And, for the first time in years, the weight I'd been carrying wasn't mine alone. The truth was standing with me. The dinner ended without dessert. No one suggested it. No one moved. My grandfather was the first to stand. He didn't look at my parents as he put on his coat. When he turned to me, his expression softened in a way that almost undid me. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "come with me." I followed him out of that house without looking back. The air outside felt different, colder, cleaner, real. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding myself together until the door closed behind us. The next morning, I was sitting in Daniel's office. Everything was calm. Too calm almost. Leather chairs, neutral. Walls, a conference table that had seen hundreds of conflicts far worse than mine, and survived them. Daniel spoke carefully, as if every word mattered. "What happened last night crossed the line from a family dispute into a legal issue," he said. "Our priority now is your protection." Protection. The word landed gently but firmly. My grandfather sat beside me, hands folded. "She's been blamed, dismissed, and isolated," he said. "That stops now." Daniel nodded. "Well, document everything. Communication will go through counsel. No direct contact." I swallowed. "What if they call me?" "They will," Daniel said honestly. "And you won't answer as if on cue." My phone buzzed on the table. "Mom." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Daniel didn't rush me. "You don't owe them access," he said. I declined the call. Then another message came through. From my father. "You've gone too far." My hands shook, but something inside me felt steadier than it ever had before. "I want boundaries," I said. "Real ones." Daniel made a note. "We'll make sure they're enforced." That afternoon, the formal process began. Letters were drafted. Accounts were frozen pending review. Requests for documentation were sent. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just the machinery of accountability beginning to turn. Later, as my grandfather drove me home, he broke the silence. "I should have seen this sooner," he said. "I trusted them because they were family." I shook my head. "They use that trust. That's not on you." He glanced at me. "You shouldn't have had to be this strong alone." I looked out the window, watching the city pass by. "I didn't choose to be," I said. "I just didn't have another option." He nodded slowly. "You do now." That night, my phone lit up again. Messages from my sister, my parents, words swinging wildly between guilt and anger. I blocked every number. For the first time, it didn't feel cruel. It felt safe. The law wasn't there to punish them yet. It was there to draw a line around me. And for the first time in my life, that line held. The courtroom didn't feel dramatic. It felt final. The ceiling was high, the walls bare, the air heavy with quiet rules no one dared to break. Every sound, shuffling papers, a cleared throat echoed like it mattered. I sat between my grandfather and Daniel. My hands folded tightly in my lap. Across the room, my parents looked smaller than I remembered. My father's shoulders were slumped, his suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. My mother stared straight ahead, eyes dull as if she'd already accepted whatever was coming. My sister sat beside them, rigid, her confidence stripped away by the weight of the room. No one looked at me. And for the first time, that didn't hurt. Daniel stood. When it was time. He didn't accuse. He didn't dramatize. He presented month by month. He walked the court through the transfers, the amounts, the memos, the consistency. He showed how the money was sent with a clear purpose and how that purpose was ignored. This was not a misunderstanding, he said calmly. It was a pattern. The defense tried to frame it as family assistance. Daniel countered with a single question. If the money was meant for Evelyn, he asked, where is the record of Evelyn receiving it? There was no answer. When my mother was called to speak, her voice shook. She talked about pressure, about fear, about doing what she thought was best, but fear didn't explain 5 years. My father followed, his words clipped, defensive. He said they had handled things internally. The judge listened without reacting. When it was my turn, I stood. My legs felt weak, but my voice didn't. I didn't talk about emotions. I didn't need to. I talked about facts, rent receipts, bank statements, timelines. I talked about paying on time, paying late, paying anyway. I didn't know help was being sent, I said. I believed I was alone. The judge nodded slowly. That nod felt like acknowledgement. When the ruling came, it was precise and unemotional. Repayment, penalties, interest, documentation, accountability. I didn't look at my parents. I looked straight ahead. Outside the courtroom, my mother tried to approach me. Evelyn, she whispered, tears breaking through. Please, we can fix this. Daniel stepped forward, calm and firm. All communication will go through counsel. I watched her stop like she'd hit an invisible wall. My father didn't say anything. He just stared at the ground. My sister looked at me once, really looked, and then turned away. As we walked down the courthouse steps, my grandfather placed a hand on my shoulder. You were brave, he said. I exhaled, feeling something settle inside my chest. It wasn't victory. It was closure. The truth had been spoken where it mattered most, and it had been believed. The money came back quietly. No announcement, no celebration, just a notification in my bank account numbers, lining up in a way they never had before. Repayment, interest, documentation, official, undeniable. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. Not because I felt rich, but because for the first time, reality matched the truth I had been carrying alone for years. My grandfather didn't call it compensation. He called it restoration. This was never about giving you something extra, he said. It was about returning what should have protected you. I didn't rush to spend it. I paid off the debts I had accumulated trying to survive quietly. I rebuilt my emergency savings. I invested carefully with Daniel's guidance into the small business I had built from nothing. The one that kept me afloat when I believed no one was coming. And then slowly I did something I had never allowed myself to imagine. I chose stability. A modest place of my own. Not impressive, not performative, just peaceful. A space where silence didn't feel threatening. Where the door closing meant safety instead of abandonment. My parents never contacted me directly. Again. Everything stayed documented, filtered, distant. At first, I thought distance would feel like loss. Instead, it felt like oxygen. One afternoon, I sat with my grandfather on his terrace, watching the light shift across the city. You didn't lose your family, he said gently. You found your truth. I nodded. I used to think strength meant enduring, I said. Now I know it also means leaving. He smiled. The dinner that changed everything didn't give me revenge. It gave me clarity. I learned that love without accountability is not love. That silence can be as harmful as cruelty. And that asking for proof doesn't make you cruel, it makes you free. My life didn't end at that table. It started there. And this time I get to decide where it goes.